So welcome again, everyone. I wanted to start off by acknowledging the funding for this webinar and also for our research program, which is the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation. So we're very grateful to them. I also wanted to take an opportunity to introduce everyone to you. We're really delighted to have a couple of visitors with us today. And first is Melissa Vigar. And Melissa, did you want to just do a quick wave? So this is Melissa. Melissa and I have just had the pleasure of working together for a number of years in brain injury in the justice system. And we're really thrilled that she can be here to share with you today. So Melissa is actually the Executive Director of the Brain Injury Society of Toronto. And she's a registered social worker, and she's worked in the field of brain injury for almost 20 years. So she's been involved in supporting individuals and families in both the nonprofit and private sector. She's overseen the design and implementation of several ABI community-based programs, including the Community Head Injury Resource Services, CHEERS, and that's an important acronym because you'll be learning a little bit more about CHEERS later on, Aging at Home Initiative, the Brain Injury Society's Transitional Support Program, Homelessness Prevention Program, and Violence Impact Program. And she's going to be talking to you about all of these programs today. She also sits on the Toronto Police Disabilities Consultative Committee, which is extremely important because both Melissa and I have been involved in work to educate Toronto Police Services about brain injury. She's a member of the Acquired Brain Injury Network of Toronto Advisory Committee, and she's also the co-chair of the Ontario Brain Injury Association's Advisory Committee. So she's going to be sharing some information with you today about the Brain Injury Society and an amazing new website toolkit that they've recently launched. So we're delighted to be able to share that with you as well. So I am, as I said, my name is Catherine Wiseman-Hakes, and I'm a speech language pathologist by training, and I'm a clinical researcher with the MAP Center for Urban Health Solutions at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. And particularly, I'm working with Dr. Flora Matheson and Madison Ford in the Justice and Equity Research Lab, which is headed up by Dr. Matheson. I'm also an assistant clinical professor in speech language pathology at McMaster University, and I sit on the Downtown Toronto Human Services Justice Coordinating Committee. So my focus as a clinician and an educator and a researcher has always been to support a better understanding of the factors that impact recovery from acquired and traumatic brain injury, as well as developing interventions, ultimately to support positive outcomes and quality of life. And I have a particular interest in vulnerable populations, and I've conducted research with individuals with traumatic brain injury who intersect with the justice system. So now I'd like to introduce our research team. Unfortunately, Dr. Matheson, Flora Matheson, who I know many of you have met before, is not able to join us today. She sends her regrets. But Flora is a key part of all of this work. She's a sociologist and scientist with MAP Center for Urban Health Solutions at St. Mike's, and she established the Justice and Equity Lab at the hospital, specifically with the aim of developing evidence-based solutions to support people who are experiencing homelessness, poverty, criminalization, and problem gambling. So her work is supported by an extensive network of community partner agencies, as well as people with lived experience of marginalization. And her expertise is in mixed methods, gender, sex analysis, and participatory community-based research. And then we have Madison, who you've met, and Madison is a really key part of our research team. She's a recent graduate from Master's in Public Health in Sweden, and she's a public health professional. She's our research coordinator and project manager for this particular team. So why are we doing this training? Well, we've had the pleasure of working with Amber and the John Howard Society of Toronto for several of years. And so it's been a long time in the works. And the reason that we're here today is that we know, and you know, obviously, that there are many people involved with the criminal justice system who've had a brain injury. And we also know that many of these individuals really may not even know that they've had a brain injury. Some do know that they've had a brain injury, but may not make that connection between their injury and some of the challenges that they're experiencing. Traumatic brain injury is an invisible injury. So we know that it may not be identified through screening or in any justice system documents. And that's really important because it is hidden and it compromises individuals all across the trajectory of justice, as well as community reintegration, and it certainly can impact on all of the work that you do at the John Howard Society of Toronto. So we know that this can pose a real challenge for staff as well as your clients, and so that's why we're aiming to do this training, is to help with that. So we also know that traumatic brain injury in the criminal justice system has actually been identified as an important public health issue. And there is a really increasing awareness of this internationally. And one of the many things that is arising from this is that there has been a list of minimal competencies developed to help identify what information frontline staff need to have in terms of knowledge about brain injury, skill, as well as being comfortable and confident in supporting your clients with brain injury. So we have taken these minimal competencies and applied them to this training, and then we've added in additional things as well. So the other thing is that we recognize that up until this time, all of you have been working to support your clients, and you've been doing this essentially in isolation as JHST. So we want to, again, be able to support you in providing, developing and providing a network of care so that you don't have to work in isolation. So let's get started in terms of the content. So I'm going to start off by talking to you about a referral network that we have developed for the John Howard Society. Some of this was already in place, but we've pulled it together. So we are going to be implementing a screening process for all John Howard Society clients with to screen for a history of traumatic brain injury. And for those individuals who screen positive, and we're going to walk through the actual screening measure on Thursday in the next session. But for those who screen positive, there's going to be a number of pathways that we are hoping that clients will be comfortable in taking with your support and encouragement. So the first thing that we are aiming to do is that all clients who screen positive for history of brain injury will automatically be referred to, and this is very informal, there's no formal referral process, to the Brain Injury Society of Toronto, which is in part why we have Melissa here today, because she's going to walk through all of the programs that are available, freely available to clients, and this is regardless of whether or not they have a formal diagnosis of brain injury. As well as the Ontario Brain Injury Association. So those are two nonprofit community organization agencies who have programming that are freely available to individuals with brain injury, regardless of a diagnosis, as well as to be able to support caregivers and professional staff. So you'll hear from Melissa later on this afternoon. So for those who also screen positive, we want to be able to put them into a system where they can receive some proper care for their brain injury. So if they do have a prior diagnosis of brain injury, with their consent, they will be referred on to what's called the Toronto Acquired Brain Injury Network, which is an organization. The ABI network is essentially an umbrella organization that is the funnel to referrals to all of the OHIP-funded specialized brain injury care in the Greater Toronto area. So the Toronto ABI network referral will also include a referral to the LHIN, the Local Health Integration Network, ABI Systems Navigator, because all across the province, every local health network has an ABI systems navigator that also knows all of the resources available and all the programming. So once the individual is referred into the Toronto ABI network, then that means they can be referred on to all of the programming across the Greater Toronto area. And we'll talk some more about that programming and what that might involve. Now, if the individual does not have a diagnosis of brain injury, we're absolutely thrilled to be partnering, and I must say that this partnership was facilitated by Melissa Vigar from the Brain Injury Society of Toronto to the Inner City Health team. And we have Nazi Abati with us today, and she's also going to be with us on Thursday, and she's going to be speaking to you on Thursday. The Inner City Family Health team has kindly agreed to accept referrals from John Howard Society clients, and if and through a referral and through working with their medical team, if it is appropriate based on interview and history taking, et cetera, they will then provide a formal diagnosis of brain injury, which will then enable, and they also have other services, but that way the client will be enabled to go back into accessing OHIP funded supports. So that's just a very brief overview. I'm sure it sounds a little bit complicated right now, but we will talk more about that as we go through. All right. So the aims of our training today are to, first of all, to provide you with some general education about brain injury. What exactly is it, and what does it look like functionally? We want to share some information about individuals that have a high percentage of brain injury, diagnosed or suspected. We also want to talk about co-occurring disorders because we recognize that many of your clients also struggle with substance use and have mental health challenges. As I mentioned, we're going to introduce you to the Brain Injury Society of Toronto, so you'll have a really clear understanding of the programs and resources they offer so that you can then share those with your clients. We are going to talk about realistic expectations for case management. We're going to provide some general strategies to support your clients. And we had aimed to have you learn from someone with lived experience. Unfortunately, that individual has not been feeling well the last couple of weeks, so he's not been able to join us. But we do have a brief video. His name is Alexander, and we do have a brief video of him because he's also developed what he refers to as the eye care kit, which is a soothing kit for individuals in crisis or experiencing high emotion. So you'll have a chance to meet him that way and learn more about his kit. So what exactly is a traumatic brain injury? So a TBI, we refer to it as TBI, is caused by, this is the formal definition by the Centers for Disease Control, any bump, blow, or jolt to the head that disrupts the normal function of the brain. And what's also important is that it can also be caused by a significant hit to the body, not just to the head. Anything that causes the head to move that is so strong that it causes the head to move. And the other thing is that not all blows or jolts to the head will result in a traumatic brain injury. And the other thing, as I mentioned, is that contact with the head is not necessary. So you don't need to hit your head on something. It is the actual movement of the head and the shaking of the brain inside the skull that causes the brain injury. So it's the amount of force that's applied to the brain. So it can be a hit to the head, a hit to the body, a hit, to the neck, or a sudden stop. So for example, if someone is in a car and the car is traveling at high speed and the car comes to a sudden stop, the shaking and rocking of the brain inside the skull can result in the person having a brain injury. Now, traumatic brain injury falls under an umbrella of what we refer to as acquired brain injury. An acquired brain injury is broken into two categories, and the first is the traumatic brain injury, which we just talked about, and that a traumatic brain injury results in any alteration in brain function or other evidence of brain pathology, and again, it's caused by that external force. So typically, we see traumatic brain injuries from a number of mechanisms. Falls and motor vehicle crashes are very common causes of brain injury. Sadly, we know that assault is a very common cause of brain injury. Being struck by or against something, so being slammed up against a wall, or being hit on the head by something that's fallen. Sports injuries are common causes of traumatic brain injury, and industrial accidents. Now, also under the category of acquired brain injury, we have non-traumatic brain injury. And this includes things like anoxia. And anoxia is a lack of oxygen to the brain. And this can happen, unfortunately, we see brain injury among survivors of intimate partner violence. So attempted choking can cause anoxia, near drowning, brain tumors, encephalitis, etc. I don't need to read through the whole list. We also consider developmental brain injury as a non-traumatic brain injury. And this is important because we also know that you sometimes work with clients who have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And the other thing is that everything that we're talking about today will also help clients who have other types of brain injuries as well. So what's also important is that things show up a little bit differently in the brain. And these are actually scans of brains. And you can see here, I think you can see my cursor. So I'm looking at the traumatic brain injury image here. And you can actually see that there is a lesion on the left side, and the whole brain has been shifted upwards and backwards. In stroke, you see a bleed over here in the brain. And then in anoxia, you see a difference because you see all across the brain, you see alterations in brain tissue. In fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, we see this inner part here, which you see in each scan. Those are actually called the ventricles, and they're where your cerebral spinal fluid is developed. And in fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, the ventricles are very large, and the actual brain itself is smaller. The brain tissue is smaller. So how do we measure the severity of a brain injury? So again, these are not things that you need to memorize in any way. It's just to understand and help you to understand how we do determine severity, because there are a number of ways. So the sort of most common way is what we refer to as the Glasgow Coma Scale. And the Glasgow Coma Scale, the short form is the GCS. And this is usually measured at the time that medical personnel arrive on the scene. And then it would be measured again as the person comes into hospital. And it's measured out of a total of 15. And in the ideal world, everyone with us today, we're all operating at a level 15, meaning we're alert and aroused, and we are spontaneously able to open our eyes, we're oriented, we can respond, and we can obey commands motorically. So if I said, raise your hand, you could all do that. So each of these refers to a score. And as I said, 15 is completely alert, normal functioning. Anything from, let me just go back, anything from 13 to 15 is considered very mild. 9 to 12 is considered a moderate brain injury, and anything below 9 is considered a severe brain injury. 3 is essentially the lowest that you can score. Below that would be considered death. So that is sort of the arbitrary method of determining severity. We do know that there are many other things that determine severity and outcome as well, but that's one of the standard measures. And we will talk about some of those other things as we move forward. So mild traumatic brain injury, concussion is on everybody's radar these days. And what exactly does this mean? So a mild traumatic brain injury refers to any period of loss of consciousness. For a moderate or severe brain injury, an individual needs to be have a loss of consciousness of greater than 30 minutes. Less than that is considered mild. So any transient loss of consciousness can be considered a mild brain injury. So we can also look at whether or not the person has any loss of memory for events immediately before or after the accident or the incident. It doesn't necessarily need to be an accident. Any alteration in mental state at the time of the particular incident. So if a person is feeling dazed, confused, disoriented, they don't know the date or the time or where they are or what happened, those are all signs that the individual may have had a mild brain injury. We also look for what are referred to focal neurologic deficits. So you could have change in pupil size, you could have numbness or tingling, you could have difficulty in pupils reacting, we could see some slurred speech. Those are all focal neurological signs. And the word transient means they may be short-term or they may be longer term. But where the severity of the injury does not exceed the following. So as I mentioned, a loss of consciousness of approximately 30 minutes or less. So even 1 to 2 minutes or not losing consciousness can also be a mild traumatic brain injury. We talked about the initial Glasgow Coma Scale. And then the last point is the post-traumatic amnesia. So post-traumatic amnesia is another method of determining the severity of the injury. And what that means is around an injury, people often have difficulty laying down new memories and learning new information. And that's typically associated with a little more moderate or severe injuries. The longer the post-traumatic amnesia, the more severe the injury is considered. So in addition to the Glasgow Coma Scale. So for a mild brain injury, we say that they have a period of post-traumatic amnesia where they're not able to remember, lay down new memories or remember or learn anything for less than 24 hours. Now, in terms of concussion, a concussion is a mild traumatic brain injury, and that is really important. So we know that most people who have a concussion, especially the first time, their first ever concussion, will resolve and they will get better within approximately 1 to 3 months. So as I said, a concussion is a traumatic brain injury. What's very important is that a person does not need to lose consciousness at all in order to have a concussion. And this is something that people are often confused about. They say, oh, well, I did get hit in the head, or, oh, I was assaulted, or I fell, but I didn't get knocked out, so I think I was fine, where in fact, they may well have had a concussion. We also know that for young people, approximately 30% of children and youth, so youth and adolescents, continue to be symptomatic at 3 months. So they do take a lot longer to recover than adults. Now, we also know that approximately 15% of individuals who have a mild traumatic brain injury or concussion will go on to develop what we call persistent symptoms, meaning that it takes them a lot longer to heal and they continue to experience the symptoms of their concussion or mild traumatic brain injury over time. And this can be for several years. So unfortunately, we know that female sex is a higher risk factor for developing persistent symptoms. We know that children, youth, and older adults, so over age 65, are more at risk. We know that if you have a history of previous concussion, it's going to take you longer to recover, and you're more likely to experience persistent symptoms, because we know that a mild traumatic brain injury and concussions are cumulative. Having a prehistory of sleep disorders makes you more at risk of developing persistent symptoms. History of migraines and a history of learning disabilities such as ADHD. So with those risk factors, those are red flags for individuals developing persistent symptoms following a mild traumatic brain injury concussion. So in terms of the more severe, I talked about this, so I don't need to belabor the point, but there are differing levels of severity in terms of the way that we formally measure brain injury. So again, the things that we look at primarily are the Glasgow Coma Scale. If someone does actually take a long time to regain consciousness and goes through a period of coma, that is certainly considered a very severe injury. So it's the Glasgow Coma Scale, the length of coma, and duration of post-traumatic amnesia that are the primary indicators of severity. How's everyone doing? Do we have any questions at this point? All right. So one of the things that we think about when we think about traumatic brain injury is the fact that our brain contains networks between all the different areas of our brain. And one of the hallmarks of having a traumatic brain injury is slowed thinking or slowed processing. And that is because we often see what we refer to as diffuse axonal injury. And what that means is that there's injury to all of those networks across the brain, so that the communication all over the brain is slower. So we do sometimes see types of challenges or impairments associated with specific areas of the brain. And I think it does just help to have an understanding of the different parts of the brain. So here are our frontal lobes, and they are the last part of the brain to actually develop in humans. And they are the part of our brain that affects our awareness, how we initiate. They play a big role in our personality, our emotions, but they're also our executive control center. So this is how we plan and organize, and we reason. It's our ability to keep things in working memory. Those are all part of the frontal lobe. And we will certainly be talking about something called executive functions, and that is a role of the frontal lobe. So the temporal lobe here, this is our speech and language area. I will also say that the frontal lobe is also partly involved in language as well. The temporal lobe is our auditory cortex, or ability to hear, communication, our ability to understand language and pay attention to sounds of what's going on around us. It's also involved in our long-term memory, and this is an area that is particularly sensitive to having seizures following brain injury. Our parietal lobe here is our sensory recognition, and also where we are in space and remembering things such as words. And then at the back of the skull, so this is the front, obviously, just in terms of orienting, frontal lobe's front. At the back of the brain here is our occipital lobe, and this is where the visual part of our brain lies. Now, what we often see, if the brain is rocking forward and backwards inside the skull, even if the head doesn't hit anything, we might see injury to the occipital lobe and to the frontal lobe. And then when it's turning and twisting like this, then we see injury to the temporal and parietal. But again, I spoke about what we call the diffuse axonal injury, which is the shearing and tearing of the neurons or the axons in the brain that slow down the communication. And finally, we have here, this is called the cerebellum, and that's at the base of the skull. And that's the part of our brain that smooths everything out. So it affects our coordination, our balance, and our equilibrium, the ability to walk or grab hold of objects. So when the cerebellum is damaged, that's where we see people who are more shaky or don't have a smoothness in terms of their movement. So the other thing that we've learned about traumatic brain injury over the last 15 years or so is that traumatic brain injury really is a disease process. It's not a single one-off event. Now, I will back up a little bit and say, yes, you know, people who have one-off or two-off concussions, most people recover and they're absolutely fine. And I'm sure that, you know, a number of you have. We all know someone who's had a concussion and they're absolutely fine. However, if someone has numerous repeat concussions, hits to the head, mild brain injuries, and or moderate severe brain injury, it is a lifelong disorder that has chronic and evolving neurological consequences. And this is really an important issue because we need to view it as such. We need to manage it as a chronic disease that can change over time. And policymakers, healthcare, and insurance providers also need to understand that so that people can have access to supports across the lifespan. We know that after one brain injury, you are at 3 times greater risk for a second brain injury and 8 times greater for other bodily injuries. So having a brain injury is a big risk factor for additional injuries. What's also quite staggering is that neurotrauma injuries, so that is both brain and spinal cord, they impact over 500,000 Ontarians and create a huge cost burden to the province in the order of $2 to $3 billion annually. So it really behooves us to understand this as a chronic disease and to provide the support so that people can have positive outcomes and lead positive lives and contribute to society. What's also important is that new symptoms can appear months after an injury, and this can due to a cascade effect. Neurons can deteriorate or die following an injury if things are not used properly or a person does not have access to rehabilitation and ongoing stimulation. And we will talk a little bit about developing brain and early injury as well as we go forward. Now, the other things that we know that go hand in hand with brain injury, unfortunately, is that there is a big link between social determinants of health and traumatic brain injury. So anyone can get a traumatic brain injury. Yes, it occurs across all levels of socio-demographic status. However, we do know that evidence suggests a strong socioeconomic gradient, and we know that individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds are at greater risk of sustaining brain injury. Many individuals with brain injury, the types of challenges that emerge following a brain injury are superimposed upon pre-existing language and literacy impairments. So many of these individuals may, for whatever reason, may have left school early. They may have not grown up in families where literacy and reading and books and culture are supported for many, many reasons. They may also have challenges with mental health, substance use, and addiction. So often we're not just looking at a brain injury in isolation, we're seeing an interplay of many particular factors. Unfortunately, we also see links between brain injury and poverty. And this is actually one of Melissa Vieger's slides. As I talked about, brain injury can also be is more prevalent in lower sociodemographic people from lower sociodemographic backgrounds, but we also know that brain injury can lead to chronic poverty. Because when someone has a brain injury, if they're not provided with the appropriate supports and rehabilitation, they become excluded from education and employment opportunities. They may not be able to return to their pre-existing life. Social isolation is a big issue following brain injury. They may have, if they're not working or they're not able to go to school, they may have limited access to safe, affordable shelter options. They may have limited access unless they've had third-party insurance from a motor vehicle crash. They may not have access to any rehabilitation. They become excluded from political processes. You need to be able to have an understanding of what's going on in order to vote, or you should. And they have lack of supports for the high costs associated with their impairments. And this can spiral. You know, we have people who have fewer skills, their self-esteem is lowered, they have reduced ability to assert their rights, they become dependent on social assistance. So it really becomes a vicious cycle of poverty. And that's what we're also aiming to break that cycle. So we also know that sadly, there is a high prevalence of individuals with brain injury who are homeless. And this is a study from St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. And I'm trying to remember the year of the study. I think it might have been 2017. And what they found was that in Toronto, 58% of homeless men and 42% of homeless women have a brain injury. And the average age of their first brain injury was 17, and 87% of those injuries occurred before they became homeless. Now, there has been recent research that's also looked at Vancouver. The stats for Vancouver are even higher, as well as Ottawa. So we know that in every community, but particularly in urban communities, individuals who are homeless, we understand that there is a high prevalence of brain injury. And of course, we also know that this population is at risk of experiencing all kinds of comorbid challenges, mental health problems, poor physical health, seizures, etc. And again, we're so delighted that we have NASIA and the Inner City Family Health team to work collaboratively with all of you. So brain injury among homeless individuals, again, is a very, very important issue, because we know that these two challenges result in a person being 5 times more likely to have visited an emergency room in the past year because they lack stable medical care. They're twice as likely to have been arrested in the previous year, 3 times as likely to have been victim of a physical assault. And then we also, as I mentioned earlier, we see we have an increasing awareness of the prevalence of traumatic brain injury among women survivors of intimate partner violence. And I just wanted to give a shout out to our colleague, Helena Lynn Haag, who is a social worker and currently a PhD student in the ABI Research Lab at the University of Toronto, and also Wilfrid Laurier University. And she has developed a wonderful, wonderful resource. It is the ABI Toolkit, and here is the link here, and it is a website specific to brain injury and intimate partner violence. And we won't really have time to take a look at it today, but I do encourage you to look at it. As I mentioned earlier, repeated hits to the head, face, neck, body, and attempted strangulation are highly prevalent among this group. And this is also very important because women in the sex trade are highly, and those who identify as women also, of course, are highly vulnerable to brain injury. And we also know that, unfortunately, there's a high proportion of Indigenous persons involved in the sex trade, and they absolutely need care like everyone else. So in a recent study that was led by Dr. Flora Matheson of women in the sex trade in Toronto, 95% of these women had sustained head injuries, either by being hit in the head with objects or having their head slammed into objects. And what was very sad was that, well, all of this was very sad, but these women didn't feel that they really needed to go to the hospital unless they were actually bleeding. They just took it as part of the job, and that they could handle it. 61% had sustained their head injuries during prostitution. So as I mentioned, many of them are unaware that they have had a TBI and don't go to hospitals. So they need support, and they need support from caregivers and frontline first responders. So screening for brain injury is crucial for all women survivors of IPV, as well as women, trans women, and men in the sex trade. So we also, of course, which is why we're here, see a high prevalence of individuals with brain injury among jail and prison inmates and those who have come into contact with the criminal justice system. So we know from research that as many as 80% of adults who are incarcerated, meaning they're actually in a prison system, have a reported history of brain injury. And this is really research that is international at this point. We also know that among youth who have been charged with an offense, approximately 50% have a documented history of brain injury. And for youth who are incarcerated, and fortunately we have less youth incarcerated here in Canada than there are in the United States. For youth who are incarcerated, the prevalence is much higher. And of course, as we've been talking about, we know that adverse life experiences are very common, sadly, for persons with history of brain injury and incarceration. And this is particularly for women who have become criminalized. And this is work of our colleague, Angela Colantonio from the University of Toronto. So research, again, from Dr. Matheson's lab has identified that people with a brain injury were 2.5 times more likely to be incarcerated than men and women who have not had a brain injury. So those are very significant odds. And they're also more likely to incur a serious charge and less likely to achieve discretionary release. So that's why, we're also involved in addition to working with frontline staff who work with these individuals, we're aiming to work with lawyers and judges. We've recently completed training with probation and parole officers, and the work that Melissa and the Brain Injury Society of Toronto have done that I've been involved in training the police is extremely important. So Melissa, we're going to be over to you in just a sec, just so that you're got your heads up there. So why is this important? Well, it's important on so many levels. We're going to be talking a lot about the challenges that are associated with having a brain injury. First of all, so that you can understand them, and also so that you know how to handle them and support your clients. So first of all, we know that having a brain injury often, not always, but often leads to many cognitive, communication, emotional, and behavioral challenges. And these complicate management even before they can often lead to a person becoming incarcerated. They create challenges for the individual while they're incarcerated, and they certainly create barriers to successful community reintegration. The cognitive challenges are things like challenges in attention, being able to pay attention for long periods of time, to focus attention. Memory, we see significant challenges with just remembering, remembering that you have a bail hearing or an appointment, that you need to do something, remembering what was talked about. Multitasking, I mean, really no one is really good at multitasking, but somehow we manage. But people with a history of brain injury find that really challenging, that they need to be able to do things one step at a time. Difficulty with self-monitoring, being able to modify behavior according to the context, stopping impulse control, organizing, problem solving and reasoning. So those are some of the types of cognitive challenges we see. We also see emotional challenges, such as being highly emotionally labile, so flopping from extreme anger to laughter to aggression. On the opposite side, we see some individuals who have a reduced affect, that they seem to be emotionally blunted, and they don't initiate in conversation, and they appear that they're disinterested. We see aggression, we see high prevalence of depression and anxiety. So there's a lot of emotional challenges and changes that are associated with brain injury. Some of those are due to the injury itself, and some of those are in response to trauma and injury. And then we also see what we call cognitive communication challenges. And these are difficulties with any aspects of communication. And so by that we mean listening, understanding, speaking, and really I'm not talking about speech, I'm talking more about being able to express oneself. Reading, writing, and thinking, because thinking is mediated by language, our inner voice. And this is due to underlying cognitive impairments. So for example, if I have challenges paying attention and with memory, I might forget that we've already had this conversation, and so I might ask you something over and over again. We also see impacts on communication from behavioral self-regulation that impacts social communication. So I may have difficulty with impulse control, and I may just blurt out the first thing that comes into my mind, even though that may not be appropriate in the context, and that can get me into trouble. All right, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, and Melissa is going to talk with you about the Brain Injury Society of Toronto.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for all of that amazing information. So hi, I'm Melissa. I'm the Executive Director at the Brain Injury Society of Toronto. For those of you who don't know about us, we're a nonprofit organization. We support individuals with brain injuries and their families or caregivers, support systems, etc., in the city of Toronto. So we do work that includes education, awareness, advocacy, and support. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show a quick video. When you're watching the video, just kind of pay attention to the folks who are in it, because I'm going to ask you a question afterwards. But I like to show this video because it's something that our members created it's all on their own. They came up with a concept. We asked them to create something that was relatable in terms of, you know, how would you explain your brain injury to others? So they came up with this really short video clip. They starred in it, they produced it, they did the whole thing, and I think it's quite amazing. So I'm going to share that with you now. So that was short and sweet. And this doesn't always work as well when we're not in person. But in looking at the folks who starred in that video, and knowing now that they themselves have a brain injury, is there anything in particular you noticed that you want to maybe point out in the chat box or unmute yourself for a second?
Would you have been able to pick them out if you saw them on the street? All right, we'll help them out.
So some answers that we typically get is one, and this actually last time we did this training with John Howard, somebody pointed out quite rightly that it's, you know, in the video, it showcases people from different backgrounds, different ages, etc. So brain injury, again, anyone, anywhere, anytime can happen. And second, if you, like Catherine pointed out, if you saw them at a bank, if you saw them at a grocery store walking down the street, you wouldn't necessarily know that they had a cognitive challenge or some type of challenge that they were dealing with. And that piece is really important, especially when we talk about you know, interactions with police, interactions with the criminal justice system, or interactions with general public, because although they might look the same, they might have cognitive challenges that are causing them to communicate differently, where they present differently, and people might misunderstand that as something other than a brain injury. So just quickly, a new program that we are starting in January. So Laura Bellin, who's actually sitting across from me right now in a socially distanced kind of way, she is our transitional support coordinator at BIST. And her program is transitioning to a homelessness prevention program come January. So referrals will be open to that program. We're certainly accepting referrals from John Howard Society. So if you have questions about this program, please contact us. We're always happy to collaborate with different providers. We know that things don't work best when we operate in silos, so we enjoy working with other communities and other professionals. So we ran a pilot program that finished last October, working with people who were either at risk of losing their housing, who were searching for new housing, who were in the shelter system, who were in unsafe living environments. And certainly I could tell 1,000 stories about the folks we came across while running this program. But all to say that people with brain injury certainly struggle when it comes to securing safe, affordable housing. So we had a person dedicated to assisting individuals in this situation, securing housing, and the program was quite successful. If you go to our website, you can see this infographic a bit better, but essentially 100% of the people who came through did have a cognitive impairment and needed help coordinating getting housing. 69% had mental health issues. Coming to the program, we had 60% were precariously or insecurely housed. 40% were homeless or transient, but 64% at the end of the day were successful getting housing. So because this program was a success, we've received more funding to do it for 3 years, and that program starts in January. So in your work, if you come across somebody who could benefit from the support of someone who is knowledgeable about brain injury and who is you know, you have somebody who's looking to secure housing, please give us a call here. We'd be happy to assist.
Okay. And just also to let you know that we have included all of the links and websites and contact information, and you'll also be receiving a schematic of the network that will have the contact information, website, phone numbers for all of those organizations, including Brain Injury Society of Toronto.
I'm only going to touch briefly on this because this is a project that actually has just come to an end. But we did also have a violence impact program. So we were working with people who were victims of intimate partner violence or other types of assault who needed that case management support, whether it be to access financial assistance programs, housing, medical supports, etc. It was kind of a one-stop case management type support system. Unfortunately, the funding for that program has come to an end. We have reapplied, but the person who was running this program has now transitioned into a program where we're assisting folks who may not have access to technology or not have the abilities to navigate technology. We're helping to get devices to folks who don't have devices, helping them access plans, helping them figure out old plans that have probably gone awry, folks who owe lots of money. We're trying to help them navigate that piece in this new virtual world that we're living in. We want to make sure that folks with brain injury aren't excluded and that they have access to the same resources they did pre-pandemic. So right now we're really focusing on our energies on making sure that people can access these resources. And I'm going to do I don't know if it's in a slide, so I'm going to do it now. It's just a brief plug about BIST. Just so you know, we are the Brain Injury Society of Toronto, but that you don't need, and I think Catherine mentioned this earlier, you don't need a diagnosis to access our services. If you know somebody who is struggling with a cognitive challenge, diagnosed or undiagnosed brain injury, and you think they need support, you can give us a call. All of our programs right now are online, and we run a variety of support groups for men, women. We have a caregiver support group. We have a wellness recovery action plan, which focuses on folks with brain injury who maybe have trauma as part of their background. So check out our website. You can call me or check out Info at BIST with any questions. But certainly if you're working with anyone with a suspected brain injury who needs additional support, just let us know. And this is the REP program I was just talking about. So it is a trauma-informed mental health support group for adults with brain injury who've experienced violence. We run these in 6-week sessions, completely free, no intake process. Just give us a call and we'll get you into the program.
I just wanted to share that of all of the many, many, many wonderful things that Melissa and her team do at the Brain Injury Society of Toronto, and it really is truly incredible, and I encourage you to go on their website and take a look. They also send out a weekly newsletter every Wednesday, which is called Weekly Wednesdays. I encourage you to get that on your listserv. And they talk about all the programs that are going on for that particular week and social activities for clients. I know they have men's groups, et cetera. So again, strongly encourage you to take a look and also get on that email listserv.
Oh, thank you, Catherine.
All right.
So these are some of the supports that are provided by BIST. We have a lot of folks coming through our doors who don't have any identification. So they need to see a doctor, but they don't have a OHIP card. So making sure, A, they have a family doctor, which we all know is a struggle in the city, and B, making sure they can access that doctor, especially now when, again, it's encouraged that they do so virtually. Getting people onto ODSP has been a big push for us. A lot of folks end up on Ontario Works for longer than they should be because getting onto ODSP is so complicated for someone without a brain injury. You throw in a cognitive impairment and it can be quite the process. So we have a support person dedicated to helping people get onto ODSP. And that all being said, if this is a role that you're providing for the person you're supporting and you have questions about the ODSP project, give us a call. Laura has really finessed the system where 100% of the applications that she sends in are approved. So if you want some advice or you have some questions about the process, please reach out. We're just happy just to chat. But yeah, and we help people, remember the important phone calls or important meetings they may have, etc. So that's just some of the stuff that we do over here. We got funding from the Law Foundation of Ontario. We noticed, as Catherine has talked about, there's a gap, certainly in knowledge when it comes to people with brain injuries going through the justice system. And here at BIST, we've certainly supported a lot of members who ran into another issue. Suddenly there's a bench warrant out for their arrest. Just a series of things that happen that's really a result of them having a brain injury and not because they're trying to be defiant or go against the law. So we got some funding to create this educational toolkit that I'm excited to share with you today. and I'll show it to you, and I'll show you how to navigate it. So Catherine, I'm going to share my screen again. But this is our ABI Justice Toolkit. So the website for this address, and as Catherine mentioned, it'll go out to everyone, it's abijustice.org. It is not searchable yet on Google or any kind of searching platforms. So you can type in the website, you can get here, you can poke around, but because we're still finessing it, it's not out there for the general public to see just yet. This is the landing page. So when you get here, you'll notice there's a little guy in the corner here, and that gives you access to accessibility tools. So if you yourself or someone you're supporting wants a larger font, readable font, different types of backgrounds that'll make navigating the site and reading it easier, those are the buttons that you're going to want to use. So it has two kind of portals when you go to the landing page. One is for the brain injury community, which I'll go into now, and one is for the legal community. So if I go into the brain injury community side, which would be the side you're using if you're supporting someone who's going through the justice system, what you'll find here is different information on how to support somebody going through the justice system. So we start off with just talking about some of the factors that Catherine had mentioned, the prevalence of ABI in the criminal justice system, some of the systemic barriers that are in place. And then we have a brain injury 101 page, and there's some really good information here that I encourage you to have a look at some point. So glossary for brain injury terms, if you get, a neuropsych report or, documents from, another medical professional, and you're not really sure what some of the terms mean, don't worry, we got you covered. You'll just go to ABI 101 glossary here. Dr. Carolyn Lemsky, who is the clinical director of CHEERS, which I know is coming later, talking about that organization, she put together some of this information for us. So there's an overview of different types of brain injury. She put together information on concurrent disorders and substance use of brain injury. And we know folks with brain injury have a higher instances of having issues with mental health and also with substance use. But what I'm going to do right now is just take you into, just so you have an idea when you get here, and feel free to come in, poke around, see what's going on. But we kind of break everything down to different categories. But I also wanted to point out, we don't leave you high and dry. So we do have a resources and help section in all of these areas, so that if you're just looking for a resource, you're not sure what to do, where to direct somebody, we've put together some resources here for you. And these are all provincial resources. You'll see some that are Toronto based, but they are provincial resources as well. So when you go to criminal court proceedings, again, we all know that legalese is its own beast, and it's hard for anybody to understand whether or not you have a cognitive challenge. So we broke down a legal glossary, and it was actually one of Catherine's colleagues, our connections, Matthew Eaton Kent, who helped us a lot with this, because we tried to simplify the definitions. We ran them by a lot of folks who have lived experience with a brain injury to say, do you understand this? How would you word it? But then we had to send it back to him, because sometimes we lost the meaning of the definition by oversimplifying it. So it was a bit of a dance, but we got somewhere. I think that's a happy medium. So we have a legal glossary here that kind of, again, breaks down those words that might be difficult for folks to understand, again, with or without a cognitive challenge, because it is a different world. We have resources for meeting with your lawyer. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm going to show you my favorite cheat sheet that we have. So this is what your lawyer should know about you. And, the word lawyer can be interchangeable with support person. So although we've made this for legal community, we can also share it for anybody. So just simple questions. How do you process information? What time of day is best for you if you're having a meeting? Information on medical history, et cetera. So if somebody wanted to communicate, the best ways to work with them, this is one form that they can fill out, and in real time, then send it to the person that they would like to have this information, whether that be their lawyer or their support person, et cetera. So, if you have time to sit down with the person you're supporting and go through these questions, it might allow you a better opportunity to figure out what's the best way to work with them. We do talk a lot about, it's usually the person with the challenges who's the best person to give you input on how to work with them, right? We don't assume that everybody with a brain injury is the same. We know that you've met one person with a brain injury, you've met one person with a brain injury. The symptoms present very different for every person. So again, this just goes through, I won't click on everything. Feel free to play and go around, but just different things, how to organize for court, what to bring, just reminders on how to make sure you know how to get there, things like that. And then we look at where to get help. So the brain injury associations across the province, different legal resources. And then we have printable tools. So these are things, again, you can help the people you support fill out, like a brain injury identification card. So something they can carry with them if they do get in trouble anywhere in the community, they can kind of pull it out and say, look, these are the things that I have issues with. Can you slow it down when you're talking to me? We have an appointment card. So just reminders of appointments that are coming up, what they might need to prepare, what your lawyer should know about you. And the other cool thing that we've done for this, again, we started this project in January, and like the rest of the world, we were thrown upside down in March. So we created how to do things using a virtual platform. So how to meet with your lawyer on Zoom, how to create a Zoom account, how to look at a Google account on your phone. I'm sure Catherine has done this. I've supported lots of folks who come with garbage bags of documents that you have to kind of rifle through to piece together their history. So, is there a way to get this up on a Google Drive? So if they're transient or if they're seeing a lot of professionals, is there some way they can kind of look at giving access to that information, or at least having one place where it's stored? So setting up Google Drives, etc. We also have how to participate in a virtual meeting. This is new for everybody. So just some tips on how to do that as well. So I'll just quickly take you to the legal side, because although it's meant for the legal community, again, it is information that anybody can use. So challenges and strategies when working with vulnerable persons, how to create an accessible meeting. And again, geared towards lawyers, but just things to think about anyways. If you're meeting with somebody for the first time, a lot of times we're very cognizant of mobility issues and making sure people have enough room for a turning radius on their wheelchair. But what are the other things you want to think about? Do you want to think about maybe they have a light sensitivity? Do they have a noise sensitivity? Again, creating an environment that's going to be comfortable for the unique person that you're supporting. And of course, Catherine put together this lovely section on communication challenges and how to address them that you'll find on both sides of the website. Some de-escalation tactics, and then a support and soothing toolkit. Catherine spoke about our colleague who is someone with lived experience who has created this amazing toolkit on what helps him calm down. And we keep his toolkit here in the BIST office. Last time we were on this call, I know Amber pulled out her own toolkit that she had. So I think you'll watch the video at the end, but I'll just give some tips and tricks on things that you can kind of just have around you to make somebody a little bit more comfortable if they do have heightened anxiety or if things are triggering them. We look at factors to consider. We partnered with FASD Justice on this. They already had some great information. We're big proponents of not reinventing the wheel, but working collaboratively with people who we shared our information with them and they shared information with us. So a big part of this is in credit to them. And again, talking about, if you're working with someone with a brain injury, how do you work around things like false confessions? Well, they might be confabulating, they're not lying, but they're just sharing what they believe to be the truth. Strategies to get relevant information, etc. And again, we have resources and printable tools. We wanted this website to not be something people glance at once, but something functional that they can then take the resources from. And then what's coming on the site, they're not all here yet, but we do have a series of videos as well that our videographer is still getting up for us. But we do have legal professionals, persons with lived experience, and people who have worked with people with lived experience in the justice system talking about their experiences as well. When the world opens up, we're at Yonge and St. Clair. Feel free to pop in anytime, but in the meantime, you can find us online. We're doing at least one group a week, so please feel free to jump in.
We got one nice chat. Thank you. This website seems very resourceful. I have sort of watched this from the very beginning, from inception, and it is truly an incredible website, and this is going to be used around the world. I really, Melissa and BIST are real leaders in this field, and this is just a fantastic, again, a fantastic website. So thank you so very much.
You're welcome. So thank you for inviting me. Nice to see everybody, kind of.
All right. So we talked briefly about executive functions in the first half, and we talked about the frontal lobes of the brain. And it's a term that I'm sure that a number of you are fairly familiar with, because it's a particularly important concept from the perspective of brain injury and also functioning in life in general. So we know that many people with brain injury do have difficulty with executive function. And why I have this picture up here is because I'd like to explain something to you from the perspective of brain development. The frontal lobes are the last part of the brain to develop, and they start to come online. They really start to come online when children are quite small. In fact, toddlers have very early executive functions when you see them trying to figure out how to sneak or do something, or for those of you that might have kids and pets at home, how they, try and convince their pets to do things, or their siblings. So those are really early planning and organization and goal-directed behavior. But really, they don't start to fully come online until sort of pre-adolescence, and they peak in terms of development and maturity during adolescence. And what we also recognize now is that our brains are really not fully developed until well into our 20s. And it's only when we're close to the age of 30 that our brains are completely myelinated. Now, I'm going to explain what that means. The frontal lobes are the last areas of the brain to completely myelinate. So myelin is a white material that covers the nerve fibers in the brain, and it increases the speed of transmission. So many of you are familiar, or may be familiar, with multiple sclerosis, the disease multiple sclerosis, which is a neurodegenerative disease. And what happens with multiple sclerosis is that the myelin sheath that covers the nerves is actually attacked, and it breaks down. So that is the opposite of the development of executive functions, where a previously unmyelinated nerve develops myelin. So when we're born, our nerves are not myelinated. So this is called an axon. And as we mature and develop, our nerves get coated with this myelin sheath. And what that allows, that allows a significant increase in the speed of nerve transmission, because a non-myelinated nerve, the transmission literally has to go straight like that. But once the myelin is there, it has a node, and it can jump from node to node, and it's actually called the nodes of Ronbayet. That's not really all that relevant. So it really speeds up the rate of nervous system transmission and signal. So as I said, the frontal lobes really don't fully come online until people are completely close to about 25. And that's really important because, first of all, when we talk about youth with brain injury and pediatrics, we are really learning now that even though in the youth justice system, that's age 12 to 17, but really people are still growing and developing, and their brains are still developing until they're 25, and really just fine tuning until they're close to 30. So that's also important because executive functions, the formal definition, are a series of what we call integrative, meaning working together, cognitive functions. And essentially, they work together to determine our goal-directed and purposeful behavior. And they are superordinate, meaning without our executive functions, we really have a tough time getting by in life. So for example, in order for us to create this webinar, this was really what we had to utilize. We had meetings between Madison, Flora Matheson, Amber, Sean Bullock joined us, myself. We had several meetings. We had a meeting with Nazia. We had meetings from Inner City Health. We had meetings with Melissa Vigar. We talked about current knowledge. We talked about challenges that you as John Howard Society staff are experiencing with your clients. We talked about the impact of COVID. And then we looked at the competencies that I spoke about earlier. And then we had to take this massive amount of information and we had to organize it. And our goal was to provide some type of educational webinar that would provide you with the knowledge, but also functional strategies and resources to support your clients. So we had to start with this information and slowly whittle it down and organize, and a lot of planning and goal-directed behavior were involved. So that's an example of executive functions. Now, people with brain injuries often have challenges with executive functions. We all experience times in our life when we're dysexecutive, and those are often when we're tired, or when we're hungry, or when we're hungry and tired, we're stressed, and we're operating on automatic pilot. So I'm going to ask for just a show here. How many of you have gotten into the car or gotten on TTC, and you're really supposed to be going to work, and suddenly you find that you're driving to your kid's hockey rink by mistake? And then you go, oh, because I was on automatic pilot, and even though I knew where I was going, I just forgot. And that happens. Or we walk out the door and we forget to bring our keys because we're busy, we're thinking of so many things, and we're on automatic pilot. So those are examples of being dysexecutive. And what happens is when we are dysexecutive, it really compromises our functional ability in daily life. So how many of you have actually gone out and started driving or going somewhere and being supposed to be going one way and end up going another way? Okay, I have. How about you, Madison? Maybe the rest of you never do that. All right. So why are we mentioning this? Again, in the context of brain injury, this is a real challenge, and it's a challenge you may see for a lot of your clients. So it's having a goal in mind, being able to keep that goal in mind as we work toward it. It's goal-directed behavior. So in order to do that, we need to be able to maintain our attention on a task and keep that task and the goal in working memory. So if we shut down our working memory, that's when we drive the wrong way, or we forget our keys, or etc. It's being able to self-monitor. It's that, uh-oh, I forgot my keys, or, oh, I'm actually going the wrong way. I need to relocate and put myself back on track. It's also being able to control our impulses. We talked earlier about that challenge in the area of social communication that's hard sometimes for people with brain injuries. They may just blurt out and say, whatever comes into their mind, or in a situation of heightened stress, they may lash out or be aggressive. We can all do that, but most of the time we are able to draw upon our executive functions to control our behaviors. We're also able to consider consequences. If I do X, I know that Y will happen. And this is something that, again, we see developing in young children. They don't always understand the consequences, but they learn pretty quickly. Okay, so again, for those of you who have children or have worked with kids, or anyone who has a cognitive impairment, people learn pretty quickly that if you put your hand on the stove and the stove is on, the consequences, you're going to get burned. All right, and you remember that, and that modifies your behavior going forward. So we need to be able to consider consequences to modify our behavior. For someone with a brain injury who has a challenge with executive function, this can often lead to recidivism or being involved in the criminal justice system right from the get-go. So I will share an example of an individual that I worked with. And this is a young man, very sweet, wonderful young man who was released from jail and unstably housed, not a lot of money. And he had a friend that owed him some money, and he needed this money. So he went to see the friend, and the friend said, well, I don't have the money, too bad. And so the young man was angry, rightfully so. And so his decision was, he said, okay, well, then I'm going to take your cell phone. And he grabbed the cell phone and off he went. And of course, the cell phone was reported stolen, and the person was caught, and he was charged again. And that really was just poor decision making and a lack of ability to self-monitor and consider consequences of behavior, not in any way that this young man is a criminal. It's also being able to modify our behavior based on feedback. So one of the reasons that I so appreciate when I can see people when I'm speaking on Zoom, and I far prefer it in person, is that I can see your faces. So it's great that I have Madison there because she might smile or frown, or she can signal me if something's going on. I can't tell if you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, this woman is droning on, or, oh, I have no idea what she's talking about. People read faces in order to be able to monitor behavior based on feedback. Or if we're communicating with someone and someone says to us, you know, we're having a discussion or maybe even an argument, when you do X, I feel, you know, that really bothers me. So we're able to say, oh, okay, I wasn't aware of that, and I can change my behavior. So those are examples of executive functions. So other components of executive functions are planning and organizing. So I talked about that in the context of preparing this webinar. And reasoning and problem solving, because even when we're planning and organizing, we're going through a reasoning process. We're going through a problem solving process in our head. Does this make sense? Is this the appropriate information to share? Is it not? If it's not, what would be the best type of information? So what happens when people have challenges with executive functions? You as frontline staff often end up being the frontal lobes for the clients, and they function most successfully. So for example, Melissa talked about, I talked about the very common issue of getting to a bail hearing. Okay, that seems like a pretty simple thing, but because people have memory problems, they may have difficulty with orientation and planning out how they're going to get there. How much time do they need to leave if they're taking the TTC? Do they have the token or the pass, their card? Do they know their way around? What do they have to do? So if you can structure all of those things for your client and break them down step by step and act as the frontal lobes, they will be much more successful. The other thing that's very important is that just because someone has a brain injury or some type of cognitive impairment, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not intelligent. They can be very intelligent, but highly functionally challenged. And you know, again, I'm a parent. I have 3 young adult kids now, and you know, when again, for those of us who are parents and we walk our kids or we support them through adolescence, when they're really dysexecutive, and sometimes they do really stupid things because they just don't have the maturity to understand. And that's often why when young kids and young adults go off to college or university, or they leave home, even though maybe they did really well in school, you know, up until grade 12, and then first year comes along and they're off on their own in residence or living alone, and things often break down. And we know that marks deteriorate in first year, and that's why. It's not because they're not any less smart, it's because all of that structure of being in a classroom where the teacher supports you, homework is checked, parents are there to, you know, make sure you're in bed on time or you have what you need. Those are all taken away when young adults go out on their own. And so you see the struggles because they don't have that frontal lobe development and that executive function maturity. It's not because they're any less intelligent. So this is a very complex looking picture, and I'm going to simplify it for you because there are 3 components of executive functions that really are the most important. And this slide is courtesy of my colleague, Dr. Lynn Turkster from McMaster University, and it's the work of Dr. Adele Diamond, who is a neuropsychologist from University of British Columbia. So there are many components to executive functions, but what is the most important is number 1, working memory. So keeping our goal in working memory, what exactly it is that we're trying to achieve. Second, it's that inhibitory control mechanism, being able to inhibit any type of behavior, thought, or response that will negate our plan. And then finally, it's cognitive flexibility, being able to think on our feet. So if we think back to the young man who was owed money by his friend, so he was certainly able to keep his goal of needing money in his working memory. However, when he went to see his friend and his friend refused to cough up the money, he had challenges with inhibitory control. So he could have been physically violent, he could have said something, but instead, what he did was he took the individual's phone. So he lacked the cognitive flexibility to create an alternative plan. So when we have something in mind that we want to achieve, we ideally can have that goal in working memory, we can work toward it, we can control our impulses, but we can also recognize that if that plan isn't working out, that we can come up with a plan B and we can think outside the box. People with brain injuries and problems with executive functions can often be very rigid and stuck on a particular idea, and not just in terms of their behavior, but what they say. They approach things very linearly, and it's really hard for them to step back, take a deep breath. Okay, that didn't work out. Let's try another way. So it's those three components: the working memory, keeping an idea in working memory, that's your goal, being able to inhibit responses, and having that cognitive flexibility to try an alternative method if one doesn't work. All right, so what are the types of challenges that we see and how can they present themselves? Well, one of the big ones, I also actually have a program of clinical research looking at sleep and fatigue following brain injury, and it's really highly prevalent. And for a lot of your clients as well, we know that many of them are unstably housed, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them will have disturbed sleep. And for every single person, if we're not sleeping well, we become somewhat dysexecutive. It's harder for us to manage stress. It affects our ability to pay attention. It creates fatigue, and it in of itself can cause a whole lot of challenges. We also know that many of these individuals struggle with pain, chronic pain. Often they've had orthopedic injuries, they've been involved in fights, assaults, falls, etc. So they may have headaches. So all of these compromise our ability to function. This next one, processing deficits and communication impairments. We touched on communication. We're going to spend quite a bit of time speaking about it on Thursday, but processing is really important. So we process information in three ways. So I talked about the fact that following a brain injury, particularly when we have something called that diffuse axonal injury, when the brain has been shaken up and all of the connections have maybe been stretched and they're not as efficient, what happens is processing is slow. And that is, again, often the hallmark of someone with a brain injury. Doesn't mean they're less intelligent, they're just slower. But we also see processing challenges in terms of the amount of information. So we all know when we're tired and we hit the wall and we just cannot take in any more information. And if you remember when you were back in school, or maybe you're a parent and you come home and you've still got work to do and you've got kids to get into bed and people to feed and all that kind of thing, and you hit that wall and it's like, you know what, I can't take in any more. Well, people with brain injuries hit that wall much more quickly. So the amount of information that they can take in is not only slowed, but it's reduced. And then third, it's the complexity of the information. So complex information is challenging for everyone. And you may find, even as you're participating in this webinar, that it may be fatiguing because I'm giving you a lot of information. Hopefully not all of it is new to you. So what I like to do is I like to use the analogy of learning a second language. And for those of you who have, maybe when you have some vocabulary and some understanding and, you know, a basic ability to communicate, but if someone comes up to you, say you're visiting Italy and, you know, you're just learning Italian, and someone in Italy comes up to you and starts, you know, speaking in Italian, and they're speaking really quickly and they want directions, and can you tell them the time, and can you get the directions, and blah, 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 blah. And you look at them and you're like, oh, are you talking to me? They've spoken so quickly that you literally have only been able to process that they're speaking to you and maybe that they said hello, and the rest of it is just, it's gone. so that's similar to a processing impairment. The next is that individuals with brain injury are often very susceptible to overstimulation. So again, you think about how we feel when we're very tired. I know that I'm someone that when I'm tired, I'm really noise sensitive. So if there's a lot of noise, it just irritates me so much. So people with brain injuries are sensitive to light, sound, touch, conversation. It's very difficult for them to block out extraneous stimulation. Everything is just a big sensory overload. And so when Melissa talked about, for example, setting up meetings and thinking about, are they sensitive to light? Are they sensitive to sound? That can be really important in enabling your client to A, first be aware, and B, being able to advocate for that, and then C, environmental modifications. So we talked about some of the cognitive challenges in terms of attention, paying attention, divided attention, being able to listen or block something else out, memory and executive functions. The other important thing to think about, and people often don't ask, is what about hearing? What about vision? People following brain injury often have challenges with maybe their eyes, particularly following concussion, or hearing. Ask them, do you have any difficulty hearing? If you do, is there one ear that's better? And if there is, then make sure you speak to the ear that functions better. Do they have any difficulty seeing? And if so, how does that impact them? Is it reading? Is it looking at faces? Is it scanning the environment? So ask those questions. Of course, we're aware of the issues with depression, highly prevalent anxiety, much higher rates of suicidal attempts in the 5 years following brain injury, and social isolation that we talked about earlier on. And then we know that there is a high prevalence of concurrent use of substances and often superimposed upon mental health challenges. And we talked about, the issues of loss of employment, financial stress, and physical challenges. It can, much as it is unfortunate if an individual has a physical challenge as a result of their brain injury, at least that helps the individual stand out that something is a challenge for them. Otherwise, it remains invisible, an invisible injury. So let's move on here. I also want to talk about, just the scope of this issue. I mean, this is a huge, huge issue. You may be surprised to know that traumatic brain injury is actually the #1 cause of death and disability in Canadians under the age of 40. And this is not just in Canada, this is actually in the developed world. So this next statistic, people are always so shocked by, but again, it's really important because the annual global incidence of traumatic brain injury is greater than that of breast cancer, HIV/AIDS, spinal cord injury, and multiple sclerosis combined. Yet, do we hear about fundraising for traumatic brain injury? Do we hear about, run for the cure for traumatic brain injury? Do we hear about hospitals devoted specifically to brain injury? We do not. And so, the focus is on breast cancer. It's less so on HIV/AIDS now, and very appropriately has been and should be. And all of these issues, spinal cord injury, multiple sclerosis, all of these issues are huge and should be addressed publicly. But traumatic brain injury, despite its immense presence, does not get the financial support at all levels of government that it needs to. And not only does it need to be through healthcare, but it needs to be in the justice system because it is a health condition. It's not criminal behavior. So as we talked about before, over 500,000 Canadians sustain a brain injury each year. And those numbers are actually very low because many people don't actually go to the MERD. So those are the ones that are diagnosed. So we know we miss a lot. Now, the other thing is historically, evidence has shown that men experience brain injury twice as often as women. And that was one of the reasons we knew that is because one of the peak ages is in adolescence, age 15 to 24. And not surprisingly, that's those dysexecutive, risk-taking, not aware of consequences, and often in males, and older age. But we're actually learning now that this is not necessarily true, particularly now that we're recognizing that women and girls are increasingly involved in sports, and also in body contact sports that perhaps they might not have been beforehand. And we are also, again, much more aware now of the high prevalence among women survivors of intimate partner violence. We know that most injuries are mild, and that's a good thing. But as I commented, mild is not necessarily always mild. We know that concussions are the third most common sports injury. The leading causes of brain injury are falls. 50% of acute care admissions to the emergency room are from falls, motor vehicle crashes, bicycle crashes, and sports related. Now, we do also see 3 specific peaks in terms of time of injury, age of injury. So the prevalent one is 15 to 24, as I talked about. And once, that those axons become myelinated and, frontal lobes mature, we see injury rates go down. And that's literally what it is. It's understanding consequences and controlling impulses. But we also see 0 to 4. I mean, obviously we see young babies, toddlers, falls, and sadly assault through shaken baby syndrome. So older adults are also, at particular risk of having brain injury. However, I really want to emphasize that having a brain injury is not necessarily a life sentence. I mean, I've been giving you all of this information that just sounds absolutely horrific, and no one wants to have a brain injury. But having a brain injury in of itself is by no means the only thing that affects a person's outcome. People with mild, moderate, and severe brain injuries can and do go on to make significant contributions to society. And this is really important because we know that with the right supports, people with TBI can lead fulfilling and meaningful lives. So I know that many of your clients don't have access to those supports that can help them to live meaningful lives. And that's why also we've put together this network, is that we want to support you to support your clients. We want them to have a positive outcome. Having a brain injury, we all have something that we deal with. I wear glasses. I'm getting up there and my kids tell me I need to get my hearing checked. And you know what? That's probably true. People have learning disabilities. Somebody has anxiety. People deal with depression. Everybody has something they're dealing with. And brain injury is another one of those things. And that's how we kind of have to look at it. Okay, so what can we do about it? How can we support the person to live a full and meaningful life? So the next thing I wanted to touch on is the issue of substance use and addictions. I know this is something that a lot of your clients struggle with. So we know that the prevalence of rate of substance use, misuse, and addictions among brain injury is high. And there's a number of reasons for this. I mean, first of all, injured brains are more vulnerable to addictions. And we know that a history of substance abuse prior to injury predicts increased disability, poorer prognosis, and delayed recovery. We also know that people use substances to numb pain and to feel better. And many of your clients, many individuals with brain injury experience terrible things, and many of your clients have experienced trauma, early life trauma and ongoing trauma. And so it's unfortunately a natural response for many individuals. But we know, we've talked about now, that even mild brain injury, mild is not necessarily always mild, and it can cause subtle impairments in our cognitive functions, our executive functions, et cetera. And for people who have a mild injury, these are often poorly recognized in early diagnosis and treatment. So when you add on the difficulties in psychosocial adjustment and coping skills that we've spoken about, these can increase the risk for chronic substance use in a subset of people with brain injury. So the other thing that we are starting to recognize now is that we know that substance use and addiction is an illness, but we're also recognizing that it actually has a neurological basis. So one of the most important discoveries of the 21st century really has been in the area of what we refer to as neuroplasticity. So understanding that our brains, we used to think that our brains were plastic when we were young, and that, by the time those frontal lobes were finished, by 18, that's what we used to sort of think, 17, 18, and that was it. It was all downhill from there. It was just, deterioration. But we know that that's not true now. We know that our brains are very plastic, and that they will respond to our environment and the stimuli and things that we do every day. Your brains will be slightly different at the end of this webinar than when you began, because you're taking in all kinds of new information and you're organizing it in your brain, and your brain responds. We know the principles of neuroplasticity are use it or lose it. Salience matters, timing matters. So that's a good thing. That means that we can continue to learn and grow and do new things across the lifespan. And that's also in part why people are living longer, more fulfilled lives, because maybe they retire from work, but then they pick up something new. They pick up a new hobby, or they learn an instrument, learn a new language. All of those things will create positive neuroplasticity in your brain. But neuroplasticity can also be negative. It can be what we call maladaptive. And substance use is an example. Substance misuse and addiction is an example of maladaptive neuroplasticity. So we know, again, that principle of use it or lose it. So every time your brain gets rewarded by using a substance that is addictive, it begins to crave those substances, and those pathways, those neural pathways, are laid down, and they become stronger and stronger and stronger. So that's why it's so challenging to break those addictions, because you literally need to rewire the brain. And not only do you need to go through the physical and mental withdrawal, but individuals who have been using substances to cope with pain, to cope with depression, to cope with social isolation, now they need something else to replace those maladaptive behaviors. And for many individuals who use substances, they feel more comfortable socially when they're using alcohol or whatever. So we need to then support them and teach them social communication skills to use when they're not using substances, so that they then still have the confidence to communicate effectively. So again, if you think about it from the perspective of maladaptive neuroplasticity, I think that really helps. Now, what do we need to do about that? Okay, I think I've spoken about those points. Yeah, we've spoken about that already. Okay, so there is a wonderful program called the Substance Use and Brain Injury Program. And that was actually developed by a world-leading expert in brain injury and substance use here in Toronto. And Melissa already spoke about her, Dr. Carolyn Lemsky, because she also contributed to the LEAP website. So Dr. Lemsky is the director of the Community Head Injury Rehabilitation Services, affectionately known as CHEERS. And this is a fantastic program here in Toronto that your clients can have access to through going through the Acquired Brain Injury Network. It does require a diagnosis of brain injury and a referral, and they do have waiting lists, but they have a number of programs. They have day programs, recreation programs, anger management programs, neuropsychological programs, and one of the programs they also have is the substance use program, the SUBI program. So you will have this as a resource. As I say, you can certainly refer clients to the ABI network, but the SUBI program, the actual manual, can be downloaded for free at this website. It's www.subi.ca. So it's an overview, and there's a client workbook. So again, I encourage you to take a look at it if you're working with a client who is using substances and you'd like to be able to support them. And also, once they have a diagnosis of brain injury, support them to be referred through to the ABI network. So we also want to move on and talk a little bit about mental health and brain injury, because again, we know that those comorbidities are highly prevalent. Anxiety and depression are the most common. And I talked earlier about the fact that these are exacerbated by sleep disturbances, fatigue, and feelings of loss of control. I know that many of your clients feel like they have very little control over their lives, and they probably don't. And so again, one of the rationale behind supporting you and setting up a referral network is to help them regain some control over their lives. Again, because brain injury is a hidden disability, many individuals are not provided with the proper diagnosis or treatment. Or about education. Education for your clients is really important too, because if they don't understand, if they don't recognize that they have a brain injury or understand that a lot of the challenges that they're experiencing are due to the brain injury, that it's not their fault, it can be very empowering for clients. Now, we also understand that there is stigma attached with the label of brain injury, just like there's stigma attached with many labels, unfortunately. But what, again, we're trying to do is to break down that stigma to talk about, yep, somebody has a brain injury, somebody has anxiety, somebody has vision issues. We bring to the table what we bring to the table. What we need to do is to be able to understand it, be educated ourselves, know what works for us, know what we need to advocate for ourselves to receive the support that we need. So not only do they need support, but they also need education about brain injury as well. So thinking about realistic and effective case management, what are some of the things that you can do to support your clients? And again, this isn't rocket science, so I'm sorry. I wish I had a magic wand that I could wave for you that would make everything right, but we can't do that. But we do know that there are specific strategies and environmental modifications that can make a huge difference for clients with any cognitive challenge. And again, this is people, not just people with traumatic brain injuries, but clients with acquired brain injury, FASD, anyone with some cognitive challenges. So the first thing is providing that structure. So be the executive functions for your client. If you can break down a task step by step, and this is what we need to do first, this is what we need to do second. We talked about the example of clients forgetting to show up for bail hearings or having difficulty and the very significant consequences of that. So if you can literally structure that, go on, I'm going to give you some very specific strategies and worksheets to use on Thursday. There's also resources available on the LEAP website. But breaking everything down into small, manageable, step-by-step tasks can, and I think we all feel better when we do that, right? We all get overwhelmed when there's too much stuff coming at us. So if we just say, here's my list for today, okay? Every day I sit down and I write out my list, and then I break it down. What do I need to do to break off, cross off the things on my list? So that helps me in terms of my executive functions. External memory supports. So this is critical. Just assume that your client has memory problems. And the other thing that's really important is, your clients, but often other people in the justice system or in the community don't. And they don't understand that the person is not being defiant or behaving badly because they don't show up for their bail hearing. It's not that they don't care, it's they have a brain injury and they have problems with their memory. And that really puts a different light and a different perspective on things. So it's so important to understand that a lot of things that happen following a brain injury are not willful, and that if we can modify the environment and provide those external structures and supports, this will make a huge difference in terms of the client's functional abilities. So the next thing is extra time to think and respond. As I've said, I think at least 4 or 5 times, slow processing is a hallmark of brain injury. So if you can just slow down the rate of speech and give your client a little bit of time to think, give them time to respond, don't change the topic quickly, just slow everything down, you'll find that the client does much, much better. The other thing that Melissa talked about when she was showing you around the LEAP website, If you're holding meetings, figure out, what is the best time of day for your clients. First of all, as I mentioned, they're probably not sleeping well, especially if they're unstably housed and they don't have a quiet, safe place to sleep. So they're fatigued, they're tired, they're sleepy. Oftentimes they're hungry, they're lonely, and so they may not sleep well. And so, expecting someone to be bright and ready and cognitively functioning for a meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning may not be realistic. So I realize that we don't always have the luxury of that, but where possible, ask your client what time it would be best for you. Would it be better if we met at 11, or would it be better if we met at 1? And then, if possible, put in structure and reminders to help them meet that time. The other thing is recognizing when enough is enough and the person needs the break. So again, thinking back to this, you're having a lot of information you're being hit with a lot of information today. I don't know, what you did this morning. I don't know what your night was like last night. I don't know what the demands that are being placed on you. So, if as we're getting sort of closer to the end, we've only got another half hour, and because I can't see your faces, I can't tell if you're getting fatigued. But if I could, I would say, oh gosh, I see people are looking tired. They're looking like, wow, this is a lot of information, and maybe we need to take a pause. So, your clients will give you cues, even though if they don't realize it, and let them have a break if they need it. And support and advocacy is just absolutely critical. We're in this together. I'm here to support you. And having a brain injury is it's not a crime to have a brain injury. And what we need is for you to be able to advocate for yourself, and for me to be able to advocate for you. That's what it's all about. So, case management tips, tricks, and strategies. Again, it's this little comic strip here about, I don't even know where to start, right? And how often we feel like that when we feel overwhelmed. It's just like, oh my gosh, where do I start? Well, again, we know that we can start if we can break it down into small, manageable chunks. And it doesn't matter if it's the beginning or the end or the middle, whatever is the easiest part, just break it down and just say, today we are going to work through this one small thing. Maybe you're applying for ODSP. We're going to fill out one form, and I'm going to support you to make sure you have that form. I'm going to give you a checklist of everything you need to bring in advance, and that's all we're going to do today. Okay, that's step one. And then that way the person can feel successful, and you've bitten off and managed one small part. So planning and pacing, this is absolutely crucial. Again, as I said, slower pace, having a plan, having a clear step-by-step plan and written down is better. And next session, I'm actually going to give you some specific worksheets that you can use with the client, and plan for frequent breaks. Try to have a break before the person needs one, and I'm not being very good at doing that today. Using memory aids wherever possible. So again, that program through BIST about supportive use of technology. If your clients have cell phones, help to put some things in their calendar, help to set up reminders, alarms, anything, verbal and written cues. If you're in a position to call or text a client, again, you may or may not, I realize that. All of those things can help. It's providing that structure, that external structure and frontal lobes to keep that goal in working memory. Exercise for your client is so important. And again, next time we're going to talk about all of the resources that might be available in Toronto. And good sleep hygiene. So sleep hygiene really is modifying the environment and modifying your sleep behaviors to have the best sleep. And I will give you a link to a resource tip sheet that's available on the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation website on guidelines for the management of concussion and persistent symptoms. So helping your client to get the best sleep. And if they're really struggling with sleep, supporting them to meet with a family physician if possible, or with the inner city health team to get a referral for a sleep study. I've talked, again, establishing routines and structure where you can, so being the frontal lobes for the individual, reducing noise and environmental stimulation. This is really, really important. As I said, individuals with brain injury really have difficulty in blocking out sensory stimulation. For us, if we're working in a room and there's a fan going on, or there's some kind of noise outside, there's construction, after a while, our brains do something called habituation. We block it out and we don't notice it anymore. But for a person with a brain injury, it will never go away. They'll always notice it. They'll always notice the lights. They'll notice the hum on the computer. Everything is just this big bombardment of stimulation. So wherever you can, hold meetings in quiet places, turn the lights down, and again, provide that support. Be clear about upcoming events. Again, as I said, it's not rocket science. Just, expectations. I'm going to help you put in your calendar everything that you need to do, everything that you need to know. Help them to record. Use those sheets and those fill in the blank forms on the LEAP website. They are fantastic because then you can save them and email them right away even to the client, so they can even at least access it on their phone. We're going to talk quite a bit about anger management in the next section, and this is just a very quick trick. And you're probably already doing this, but there may be particular triggers, particularly if again, clients have a history of trauma, they're using substances and they're not sleeping well. Are there particular things that trigger the client? And also, is there a particular time of day or an event? And does fatigue play a role? And if so, can you try and mitigate that? We will talk more about this this next time. That in of itself, of course, is not going to manage, but it's a place to start. Using redirection techniques. One of the things we know is that people with brain injuries, particularly those with moderate severe injuries or a history of a lot of injuries, can be very rigid in their thinking and they can get stuck. And so as a result, they do something called perseveration. They get stuck on an idea. And if they're upset about something, they will keep going and going, and it will perseverate. It will go over and over in their head, and they'll need to talk about it a lot. So sometimes you literally just have to break in and deflect and try and redirect where possible. And we'll talk about specifically how to do that, because I know that's easier said than done. We're also going to use, use some communication strategies. And this is a great resource here, caregiverinfo.ca. Again, at the end of all of the training of both training sessions, we will also be sending you a list with all of the resources that we talk about today and Thursday. So you'll have all of the resources and all of the links and websites, etc. So goal setting is really important. Let the client talk freely about issues that are facing them. What are their goals? Maybe it is that they want to get on ODSP. Maybe they want to go back to school. Maybe they want to find stable housing. But if you're able to help them come up with, what is one small manageable goal that we can work on, and then again, help break that goal down into manageable steps and talk about specific practical strategies for goal setting, in the coming week. So if you start off with setting the goal, and then the next session, all right, we're going to break it down and we're going to come up with some strategies. And again, on Thursday, we will walk through this in much more detail. Hear what they're saying, validate what they're saying, reflect back, simplify for them if you can. Sometimes people with brain injuries are hyperverbal and they do talk around in circles, and sometimes it is hard to pick up exactly what's going on. But reflect back. If I understand, you're telling me, validate it. The other thing is placing goals in order of importance. Wherever you can use visual aids, that's really helpful. So you could even have a worksheet where you put a goal of finding stable housing at the top. That's the overarching goal. And then again, breaking it down into the steps, but putting those steps in a box, some kind of flow chart, Venn diagram, sun diagram, can be really helpful for the person, because again, then each component task then becomes manageable, and you have clear understanding of what the person needs to do and what you can do to support them for each of those sub goals. And take pictures. The phone is fantastic if they have a camera on their phone. Take a picture of what you talked about. Take a picture of the diagram that you came up with so that you can refer to it at a later time. Okay, I'm just taking a look at the time here. Engagement tips. Again, I know these are all really common sense. Look at things that precipitate challenge, perpetuate challenge, and things that also protect the client. What are some of the things that the client, pardon me, excuse me, I just need a sip of water here. Are there things that the client is doing that are self-protective, but that may not be self-efficacious? So what are some alternative things that you can do to support that client to find the comfort and protection that they need? In terms of goal setting, again, picking the easiest goal to accomplish and help to get it done first. This, of course, it's all about relationship building, and I know you understand that since you work, one-on-one with your clients. We talked about breaking down tasks, trying to remove barriers. That's a really important part of the problem, the planning rather, and we will, next session, we're going to walk through that in greater detail. But if we can think in advance, what are the barriers? Like, we know what they're going to be. So let's talk about them. Let's have a plan for how we're going to address those barriers. Then the person will feel much more comfortable in being able to negotiate because they have a plan. And not only do they have a plan, but they have you as an advocate and as a resource. They don't feel like they're in this on their own. And we all feel better when we have someone around for moral support, right? Managing something on your own can be so overwhelming. And when you just have someone to put a hand on your shoulder or say, hey, I got you, we've got this, we can do this together, that makes such a difference. Sometimes they're going to need space. And, again, I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you understand that. But if they need space, that's okay. In fact, that's a good thing if they're able to verbalize that. Hey, I'm having a hard time right now and I just need a break. I see that as praiseworthy. It's like, hey, you're getting to know yourself. You're getting to know what you need. I respect that. That's fantastic. Why don't you go take a break, have a cigarette, do whatever you need to do, and then come back. The door's open. And summarize information for them at the end. If you're having a meeting where you're planning things, with their permission, would you like me to write down a brief summary of what we talked about? That is so helpful because they're going to forget. Well, they may. It's likely that they're going to forget. So not only do you want to summarize what we talked about today and the important information, summarize the next steps. Next time we are going to, so we always have a plan in place. Using the phone, model for your clients. Do the call jointly. Often, people with brain injuries have difficulty making phone calls. Help them generate the list of questions beforehand. Well, you're calling because you want to find out about getting some rent support, or you need to find out about getting an OHIP card. Let's write down the questions that you need to ask. Let's write down the phone number. Let's write down the questions. Let's practice. I'm going to practice being, it's highly unlikely that we even get anybody on the phone now, but if we do, please press this button and go to that, call this. And then the person says, well, I need this, or they say, well, I'm sorry, I have to put you on hold. It's helpful to practice those things so that, the individual feels more confident in knowing how to manage it. And take notes for them if you can overhear, because it may be difficult for them to do it on their own. Skill building, practicing, solidifying skills. Again, it's breaking it down into small steps and building up on a hierarchy. People with brain injuries have difficulty generalizing from one environment to another. So wherever possible, try to do the skill in the environment where the skill is going to be needed. Don't expect them to be able to do everything independently at one time, and they may not be able to. We talked about the review of accessible documentation strategies, the use of the LEAP website, setting them up with a Google Drive. All of these things are really, really helpful, and I really encourage you to refer your clients to BIST to work with their technology support program. I mean, if you have the time, obviously do that too, but it's really, really helpful to help get your clients organized. So, I really like this quote, obviously. This is Trevor Noah. People love to say, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. But what they don't say is, and it would be nice if you gave him a fishing rod. So that's the part of the analogy that's missing. So for people with brain injuries, we may need to be the fishing rod, and that's the frontal lobes. All right. They can't do it on their own without support. Oh, so that's the BIST information. So that's the information, and again, we'll make sure that we send that to you. These are some additional resources. Again, we are going to be sending those out to you. We have a whole list here, the various head injury clinics, March of Dimes, the list of all the provincial ABI navigators, the Toronto ABI network, but you will have that, and you will have access to that once your clients have that diagnosis. All right, so we're going to spend the last few minutes talking about Alexander's eye care kit, which is his soothing kit. And again, I'm so sorry that he wasn't here to present it to you himself, because he's just such a wonderful speaker, and he's a really lovely colleague. So Alexander lives with a brain injury. He has some significant mental health challenges. And he has experience with the criminal justice system. He is highly intelligent. He's a fantastic speaker. He was a former teacher. And in learning to cope with his challenges as a result of the brain injury, he developed this kit. He actually participated in a really fantastic program at Ontario Shores Mental Health Hospital in Oshawa, and they have a very good brain injury program for people with brain injuries and mental health challenges. So that's another one that's included in your resources there. And he, through that experience, he found it very helpful to learn strategies to help soothe him when he found himself spiraling out of control and getting overwhelmed. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you the video. So I'm escaping out of here. I have it on the next one. So the items are primarily tactile. So he will talk about it himself. So the user holds any items in their hands and they can manipulate it. And the reason for this is that when a person is in crisis, so we talk about our frontal lobes and our executive control and our goal-directed behavior. When we're in crisis, our executive functions and our goal-directed behavior shuts down. And we're literally running on our sort of lower cognitive abilities. We can't really think. We're not really in our head. We're just in our bodies, and we're hyperventilating and we're stressed. And so we need some sort of physical tactile stimulation to break that response. So the items in his kit are aimed to help the individual in crisis relax, to focus, ground themselves, and temporarily distract them from their thoughts and actions. So he suggests that an ice pack is a #1 key essential to use with someone who seems violent, irritable, losing their temper, who's got pain on their body, either by self-infliction or bodily pain caused by their disability. Okay.
Hi, my name is Alexander Jordan Monconrob. I have created the eye care soothing kit. So I have created this because I have disability, I have brain injury. So I use these tools on a daily basis to help me just focus my attention in a situation when I feel I'm not under control, or if I feel stressed or overwhelmed. Some examples of stressful situations could be at court, going to an interview or a meeting, or socializing with people. I will show you how each item works, and again, you can add your own stuff. So this is a monkey. It's a beanbag monkey. It's flimsy, it's floppy. You can throw it. It takes your mind away from stuff. I like to do this with it just because it kind of gives me circulation in my arms and my heart and my head. So I have low circulation flow in my brain. And I feel sometimes that I'm going to faint or have a seizure or PTSD from it. I get scared. So when I do this, I feel the air circulating from my chest all the way up here, and it gives me kind of like a bit of emotion. So having an object in my hand that's gonna focus me is not too heavy, and it distracts me, and it helps the oxygen flow. Next is a massager, just a little wooden massager on my head if I have a headache, or the back of my neck right here. I'm gonna roll it. Usually my neck really hurts here and I become very dizzy. So in order to relieve the strain and tension and pain in my head, I just want to roll it up and down. If you want to be more like discreet about it, you can like just like roll it on your leg. Let's say you're sitting on the bus and you're like really nervous and you're like, all right, just roll. Or on my arm, the arm feels really nice too. Just roll it there. There you go. If you don't have a rolly massager thing, just use your thumb. Go in circular motions. This is another squishy, but it's smooth and it's a little elephant. What this does, so you know when you go and, or maybe you don't, you go and you get a needle at the doctor and they're always like, all right, here's a little ball. Oh, I can't find your vein. You're gonna have to squish it. Well, it's like the same thing. You're having a hard time breathing. You feel a little anxious. Okay, I'm just gonna squish it. Get my veins pumping, get my oxygen flowing. If you're someone that likes to connect things, these are good connectors. You just take your mind off stuff and just build something. You can get Legos. You can add Legos to that, like just connector items for especially clients that are on the spectrum or that just like to fidget, get connector toys. So you're gonna blow. Whoa, a bubble. Whoa, that's awesome. Okay, so it gets the circulation going and it also gets you to focus. So one focus activity that you can do with the bubbles, not just by blowing, but focus on one bubble and just watch it with your eyes. And that will bring you back in focus because it's also good for your brain to exercise your brain and focus on an object. You can also do this with your finger as well. I have a court date example. I don't do well with lights and I'm gonna be there for maybe 2 to 4 hours. So it's gonna be a long day for me. So they can't turn the lights off in the court, right? So put a pair of sunglasses on. It helps relax. It gives a warm, calming feeling. Take a few deep breaths. Also, a breath that you can use is, it helps balance your brain. I learned this off YouTube. You can block a nostril. And it helps balance out the equilibrium in your brain.
And it really does actually help to calm the nervous system.
This is a cinnamon pure essential oil. So you can use this in your home or in like a diffuser. You could also put it on your body. You could put it on your wrists, which help, and under your earlobes or on your temples. So if you have this, oh, it smells so good.
So I'm going to stop the video because I think it gives you a good sense of the types of things that he does have in his kit. and he's so articulate about it. And so Amber does have one of his eye care kits in her office. He also sells them. He has a little website. I don't mean little, I don't mean to belittle that at all. He has a website, and he sells the kits on a website, or you can also go to a dollar store and just put together your own kit. But they really are very helpful. All right, so we literally have 2 minutes left. So our key take-home messages from today is that traumatic brain injury is highly prevalent amongst those in the criminal justice system, which of course because that's why you're here. TBI and ABI are chronic health conditions, and they need to be considered this way. And we know that with proper support from a multidisciplinary team in the community, that people with brain injuries can live meaningful lives and contribute to society. So to support you to do that and to support your clients, we have developed a network of resources and care that you'll be able to access for your clients. So next week, it's actually going to be Thursday. Last time we had them a week apart. We're going to have a short presentation and introduction to the Ontario Brain Injury Association, their role and how they can help. You're also going to meet Nazia Bahati from the Inner City Family Health Team and learn about the Inner City Family Health Team. We are going to go over the screening tool step by step. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time focusing on communication, anger management, and practical strategies. So the last thing, we are also going to send you out something called a communication skills checklist. And it's just a very brief checklist that asks you to think about your own communication style and to reflect on it. And to see if there's anything in your communication style that you might be doing that maybe you might want to think about changing in your work with your clients. So for example, I always kind of joke because when I'm speaking on Zoom, I use my hands. But I've been told by people with brain injuries, or some with people with brain injuries, that that's actually really distracting. But it's hard for me to not do that because that's actually part of my communication style now. And you remember back when you tried to speak without using the words and then, when you had to think about it, how much more difficult it was. Maybe you speak quickly, maybe you use a lot of complex sentences. So it just asks you to think about certain types of communication behaviors and whether or not you use them. It literally will take you 3 seconds to fill it out. But I would appreciate it if you could take a look at it, and then we will talk a little bit about that on Thursday as well. And it is exactly 4 o'clock. So I thank you so very much. If you do have questions or things that we have not addressed today and you are interested, make sure you save them and raise them next time. And again, thank you very much for your participating, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday.